You have cancer. 3 words that change a life forever. We would like to offer another 3 words. Be an overcomer. Welcome to the 1% Podcast, where our conversations with other cancer warriors, survivors, and caregivers allows us to give you that extra boost you need to face your challenge head on, live life from a new perspective, and forge a path that keeps you moving free and clear. Now, welcome your host and cancer survivor, Truett Taylor.
Welcome, everyone, to the 21st episode of the 1% Podcast, the show where we dig deep with cancer warriors, survivors, and caregivers in order to give you that 1% you need to keep pushing forward. So on the show today, we have Chad Walkaden. Chad is from Sydney, Australia, and he's a 3-time cancer survivor. Chad's a forensic social worker and has a ton of experience in family court, child protection, drug and alcohol, and mental illness. Chad, what's going on, man?
Hey, man. How are you? Great to join you.
Awesome to have you on the show. I know we've talked a lot, and I've been looking over your website. So Chad has a website out called The Cancer Blueprint. If you guys are listening today, be sure to check that out. We're going to talk and dig deep more into that and get Chad's perspective on the whole cancer blueprint and all the research he's done over the past several years. So you guys are in for a treat when it comes down to that. But Chad, when I was looking on your website, man, I noticed something that you and I had in common. We both had long hair back in the past. Couldn't even recognize you at first when I saw that hair, man.
Yeah. It's a bit of a change. It's a massive change, and there is a big story behind that, man. Because I was on a chemo, and I'm sure we're going to get to this, but I was on a chemo where my hair didn't fall out, and a lot of what I talk about and what I'll go into is identity and our perception, our fit in the world. And for me, having those locks was a way of kind of masking vulnerability, but presenting something to the world. So there was a lot of significance. I used to call myself Samson, man. So yeah, we can go into that if you like.
Nice, man. Well, if you look on the internet enough, you'll find pictures of me with long hair back in high school. I just did it because I don't know why. I thought it was cool, I guess. But
yeah. Man, it's pretty interesting at the moment because I had a beard as well. So my passport photo, I'm in the States at the moment. So it's like any country's all right. But when I came into LA and the guy looked at me, I was like, there's a story behind it, man. You know, because, yeah.
Awesome, man.
The same guy.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show today. I think after reading all your content and having conversations with you, you have a very unique approach that I think a lot of people aren't quite used to. But since we serve a lot of the young adult population on the show, I think your methods and your perspective is going to give people a great approach and possibly an alternative way to view the cancer diagnosis and how to make it through all the different scenarios that people are forced with. So first question I have for you, man, why do you feel like it's important for you to share your story with all of our listeners today?
Yeah, man. So everything that I talk about within my work, within my personal life is this belief in better. And this belief in better was formed from my own experiences and my past knowledge. And there's a belief that cancer care needs to improve. There needs to be a focus on our emotional, psychological, social, and physical well-being. And I think that it needs to change. So that's the message that I need to give out, man.
I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of times the emotional side of everything is often neglected and so much is put on the physical side. So I love how you bring it all in as part of the equation that helps us get better.
Yes.
What is one takeaway specifically from your story and the things we'll talk about today that you want people to remember right before we get started into all of this?
Yeah, man. And I want to just be, in the past, I probably wouldn't have been able to be this bold and this brave. But I would like to say that whatever you're facing, I've got someone in mind who I'm talking to at the moment. And I just want to send him out a message. And there's a lot of people in that same situation. And you can do it. Keep on going. Love those people around you. Seeking inspiration from stories from people who's made it before. Use that as your fuel and have plan A. Keep going.
I love it, man. So why don't you tell everybody what your life was like prior to your diagnosis, back when you had the hair flowing and everything was growing?
Yeah. So I grew up in Sydney. I've got 2 older brothers, parents. I lived a fairly active lifestyle. Loved being by the beach. I always surfed, played football. Did those things that people do from where I'm from in Sydney. I went and finished high school and went on and did a Bachelor of Education. Worked in the disability area. I was planning on going to be a teacher. And I finished my degree, and that just wasn't my calling. I didn't feel the fit. So I had the opportunity to go on and do a Bachelor of Social Work after that. So I went on and completed a Bachelor of Social Work and made the decision to go and travel. So I relocated to London. I used that as a base to be able to explore Europe. I had the opportunity to go surf Morocco, surf in Scotland, surf down in France, go check out all these places, and really, for the first time, place myself in a different situation. Like, everything was normal and everything was great. And I remember the day that I was leaving, I had a farewell party in this place called the Botanical Gardens in Sydney, and all my friends were there, and it was a beautiful day. And I remember saying to some friends, I don't know why I'm going. Like, life is great. Like, life is amazing. But it was a step that was needed. And I went over there career was very important for me. I went over there and continued my studies. So I did some postgrad studies in family therapy, and I continued working as a social worker for one of the local authorities over there, and just traveling a lot. I was fairly health conscious, but my idea of health was very different to my idea of health now. And, that there's no other way that it can be. I think I used to exercise and I used to eat okay. And that was my concept of health. But now my understanding of health and what it means to be healthy is much, much different.
Awesome, man. Well, look, I love hearing about your past and hearing about like what your life was like. So I feel like that's an easy way to resonate with a lot of our listeners today. Just to break it down, you've got a guy from Australia talking to a guy from Atlanta. And I apologize ahead of time. My throat's a little weird. I've got this cold thing going on, so I have an occasional cough. Just don't let that throw you off or whatever. But tell us about your life leading up to when you were diagnosed. Like, what kind of signs and symptoms were you having that maybe something was a little bit wrong the first time you were diagnosed with cancer?
Yeah. So I was 29. I was living in London. It was coming up for my 4th winter. And anyone who's familiar with that city would know around September, October, like September's generally fine, but the end of September, October, it was an early winter. So there was a mood and an atmosphere in the city already. And my immune system was a little bit affected. I noticed that through my exercise. And as I said, I was relatively healthy. So that meant I did exercise every second day. But I just realized every time I trained, so every time I did some exercise, the next day I would get a little bit of a cold. And you're 29, didn't go to the doctors at all, really, because there was no need. You're never ever going to think that it's cancer. So the symptoms leading up to it were unknown. It really wasn't anything at all to indicate. I just had this cold that continued for a while, and there was some significant shifts in my thinking, and I ended up getting rushed to a hospital, and that was in January. But in the lead up to December, I was very fortunate. I was going to enjoy some time down the Alps in France to go snowboarding. And I didn't want to have this sickness. I was thinking maybe it was glandular fever. So I ended up going to the doctors, and they said, you've just got a buildup of acid in your stomach. Just go home. It's nothing. And I don't, when I'm saying that story, I don't lay any blame with them at all. Like, the cancer that I had was 1 in a million. Like, I don't hold them responsible or anything like that. It was just, I went and saw them. She was overworked. It was a busy clinic, and they didn't detect it. And that said, I had a cancer that was, when it got detected, it was 20 centimeters, but 15 centimeters of stage 4. And 7 of the best doctors who I saw, even when they knew that there were scans to show what was inside of me, they couldn't feel it. So how was this doctor going to feel it? Like, the only way it was going to come up was through a scan. So to cut a long story short, man, there was no real symptoms. It was just, there was a little bit of a cold, and I was only aware of that. I didn't take any days off work. I was only aware of that because my exercise. So as soon as I exerted energy, then my body the next day would go, hey man, you've pushed it. But it also, in the lead up to that, I cycled. So in July that year, I cycled from one side of the UK to the other. And 2 months before that, I climbed Mount Kinabalu in Borneo. And so I'm doing all this, and it's likely that something was already inside of me then, for how big it got to. So yeah, there was no real symptoms. So I can't really contribute and share too much that's going to support people on that one, mate.
Yeah. So what kind of cancer were you diagnosed with?
I was diagnosed with a stage 4 adrenal cortical carcinoma. So it's ACC is the abbreviation. It affects 1 in a million people.
Wow.
Very rare and aggressive form of cancer.
So what kind of treatment did they start giving you once they found out that you had this?
Yeah, so that was the first. So I got diagnosed in 2014. So I've been diagnosed 3 times. Each time the circumstances got worse. So my first diagnosis, as I said, stage 4 adrenal cortical carcinoma, cut me open, took out my right kidney. And then after 3 months, I started a drug called mitotane. Those who don't know, it's a form of chemotherapy. It is a derivative of DDT. So it was banned from human consumption in 1972. And I was popping that into my system AM and PM. At the time, I had a life expectancy of under 2 years. I was deemed terminal. There was no way that I was going to live. And if I did live, my existence was to be on daily chemo. So there was no light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm not saying that to, dramatize my circumstances at all. But the nature of what was occurring for me was there wasn't my life and my existence, and the construct that I had for how I was going to live my life was now governed by these circumstances. I didn't believe that, and I'm sure you're going to get to that later on. I had to believe something differently, and I placed great emphasis on that.
So what makes you, what made you think something was different? So you get this terrible diagnosis and you don't know exactly, what the outcome is going to be, but what they're telling you is it's going to be bad. What do you feel like it was internally kind of giving you a different idea of how things were actually going to turn out?
So this is where I think a lot of my past experiences of working with people and my understanding about the mind and working in complex family circumstances, where I really saw myself as my first case. So I had to see myself as creating my own blueprint because I had to get out of this. I always saw that there was a capacity of me and a capacity of what I could do to influence my outcome. And a lot of that starts with your mindset. And from the very first point of diagnosis, I had 2 key beliefs. So I'm very much a believer in narrative therapy, and I'm very much a believer in how much we can construct our worlds. And I think we do that through a range of different methods, but it's very important for that self-talk and those beliefs that are formed. And at the very first point of diagnosis, so when I had a session, I would walk back to my room and there'd be 13 people standing outside my room. I was a very curious case. And of course, I was very open. I'm always about contributing to the mass and supporting others through information and stories. And I was sitting in a room and there was seven of us around, and they told me some of the things that were going on. And immediately there was 2 thoughts. One was, I'm going to be better than ever before. And what that meant wasn't just that I was going to be better in my health. It was like, I'm going to get better in every way. I'm going to be a better man. I'm going to be a better son. I'm going to be a better lover. I'm going to look better. I'm going to feel better. I'm going to think better. The other one, and I'm not going to use the language here, but it needed to be very compelling. But the other key one was, I'm not going to be known as Chad, that poor C with cancer. Now, I excuse the color and I didn't use the word, but that's something that's very common. Poor Chad. Did you hear about him? Because the other thing was, there was a change of location. I'd been living in London for 4 years, and then I was going back to my hometown, and I was going back as the guy with cancer. Now, I was aware of that fear, and I was aware of the perception that could be held against me, and I was aware about my identity. But I also needed to construct an identity for me, and that needed to be one that was based on something different to poor Chad. Because if I was going to allow poor Chad to then come into my life, what then does that mean for my behaviors? What then does that allow me for my interactions? What then does it allow me to get up when I'm feeling fatigued and nauseous? Like, I need to have this belief that keeps me going. And that gets tested every day, as you know, and a lot of these listeners know. And it got worse. Like, so the next time around, I was on chemo for 13 months, lived like a saint, made heaps of lifestyle changes, Was very vulnerable in those early days. I didn't know what to eat. People were telling me all these different information, and that's the key message. A lot of these listeners out there at the moment are vulnerable. I talk about the friend with 20 lemons. At the moment, you've got to get your body into an alkaline state, and this friend will come around, and they've got very good intentions. They want to support, but the end result is that we feel confused, we feel vulnerable, and we don't know what to do, and it can become overwhelming. So at that start, I was trying to piece together what this blueprint was going to look like, but I only had the tools. I talk about it in a way that, think about me as an iPhone 5 back then, and all I could do was what an iPhone 5 could do. And I had to go through the system, and I had to get these upgrades. And unfortunately, these upgrades had to come through pain and progression. And now, hopefully I'm an X. There's a few changes, but I think it's just a process. And I think that's a good way to get this message across to people, is to talk about it in terms of our thoughts, such as codes and programming, because that's the idea that we can have control of these things despite our circumstances.
Let's talk about identity for a second. You brought that up, and that's something that I talk a lot about with several different people, is your identity. Once you have a crisis in your life, whether it's a sickness or a divorce or something along those lines, you can get labeled with that identity. Like, I'm true at the guy that got divorced, or true at the guy that got cancer, or true at the guy that did this or that. Yeah. And a lot of people hold on to that as their identity because maybe before they didn't, accept their identity or didn't know who they really were. And yes. I think this is something that I see a common problem a lot with people, especially younger adults, is whenever we get cancer, we still have so much life in our head left to live, and we become the cancer patient now, and the guy with cancer or whatever. But that's not your identity. That's just a part of your identity. And that's something that I want to express out to everyone listening today is, the cancer diagnosis, just like Chad mentioned, is not your whole identity. It's just part of who you are. And you have to look at yourself in the mirror and decide, which path you're going to take. You're going to have cancer no matter what, but as you go through the cycle and the journey to get rid of it, you don't have to be, the poor, pitiful person with cancer. You can be the courageous survivor and fighter and all the different adjectives you want to put with that. But you have to really make up your mind and live that mindset out each day as you look in the mirror and as you progress through life.
I would also say, to add that, I agree, man. And I would also say you don't have to be anything as well. You can just be. And if you're going to be, you're the human. So you're the person, the guy or the girl who has cancer or who had cancer. It depends on how you look at it. But it's also that capacity to be. And what's very difficult for a lot of us is that idea that we can be. Because if we are thinking about the future, if we're worried about, what happens if I didn't do this? Or why did I do that? Or did something I do contribute to this? If we're either thinking about the past or projecting in the future, as in, am I anxious about an upcoming result? Is this cancer going to come back? We're not living. And all of us, all we want to do is desperately live. This happens to us at a premature time when it shouldn't really occur. And so we get faced with our existence. And maybe it's the first time that we're faced with our existence. And for those who haven't, that's when it becomes more complex, because cancer has the capacity to then compound past losses and bring these past losses up. So it makes it more difficult to live and to be in that moment. So I just thought it was important to add that on, mate.
Absolutely. Why do you think that younger people have a harder time with coping with cancer compared to maybe older adults who are later in life?
Yeah, totally. If we have a look at what's going on for them developmentally, if we're looking at young people, what's going on? What's the most important thing nearly in their life at that time? It's an identity and their fit into their social world and their social domain. Yeah, and in this day and age with the different influences as well, there's different losses, there's different pains, and how people are going to be going about it. And importantly, what does that fit with my world, and how does my world see me? If we have a look at an older population, I do a lot of work with older people as well. A lot of people at a later stage, they may have had kids, they may have grandkids, they may have already set themselves up with financial security. They may have already been able to enjoy 60 years. They may feel very fortunate. Some older people would have been able to see the massive changes that have occurred when television wasn't even around. So these young people, all we've got is, what young people now know is everything that's available. When we have a look at the different decades that people have lived through and the different changes, there's life behind that. So like if we have a look at that life cycle, it is very different for what happens for a young person. And also what compounds the circumstances is that it's our parents, man. When we're young, that's how that compounds the circumstances. When you see the look on your mum's face, when you have a look at your dad and they don't know what to do and they want to give you their kidney, but they can't, you don't want them to be upset. So you got to put on a brave face. You've got to manage all these other circumstances. So it's much more complex. It's much more complex, I think.
So what would you say to the young adult out there that's listening now that is being diagnosed with cancer and they're trying to be, the tough one for the family because they don't want the parents to have to see them this way or to think about the loss or to view them as weak or as helpless? What kind of advice do you have to the young adult out there that's listening?
Yeah, man, it's very interesting. It's very, very good question. And what I think is very important is to be able to be vulnerable, is to feel pain and to be exposed and to cry, but to have something to then get that out of your system and have a purpose or an opportunity, have something that makes sense to you that can pull you out of that. Because we need to feel, and this isn't normal. So if you have a look at it, and this isn't my work that I'm going to quote here, but it's a normal reaction to an abnormal circumstance. So it's okay to feel like the world doesn't make sense. It's not meant to make sense yet, and it may not make sense yet, and that's okay. But we don't want to stay there, and that's the key. We want to have something that can pull us away from that, and that's that future vision. What is the opportunity for you at the moment? What are your aspirations? What are your dreams? What do you want to do when you're older? And how can this become so vivid in your mind through a visualization or something that's pulled towards something of significance? And something of significance involves something greater than us. So is it love? Is it purpose in your work? Is it a contribution you're going to make to others? Is it your faith? Is it through a different form? Is it through art or music? Is it through your education? Like, I'm not sure what it is, and there's no right one. It's not that Chad says this, so that's it. It's completely up to the person. But I'm about allowing these emotions in. So allowing these harder and more difficult emotions to come in, because they then give a pathway to then be able to discover and make sense of what this is all about. And I think if we don't allow them in, they come in anyway, man. As you know, our mind is going to be occupied. I often think, we're trying to give this advice, and what I think back to is that I used to project that my mind could then, if I was being able to open up my mind and show you on the wall the amount of space that was directed to different things. So let's just have a look at Chad's pie chart on the wall. 100% of it back then was cancer. 100% of my world was cancer and living. I had to live, but a lot of it was motivated by fear of death. Fear that I wasn't going to be a dad. Fear that I wasn't going to go back to work. Fear that was I going to be on the pension forever. Fear of loneliness. That was all motivated in this dark, dark world. But I was able to get through that. And I think that's the key message. The key message is that it's been done before, that Roger Bannister effect. And that's crucial. So I love what you're doing, man. I love you being able to get this message out to others, because if this reaches one young guy or young girl out there and they're listening to this and this gives them a little bit of strength, a little bit of hope, a little bit of inspiration, well, I'm a happy man. And that's what I'm about.
Absolutely. There's a life cycle to everything in our lives. And then there's a life cycle to the cancer journey as well, too. And if we get stuck along some point, will need people or circumstances or someone to kind of help teach us how to get through those certain things. And that's what I love about your cancer blueprint is it allows people not to get stuck, whether it's a physical, mental, or emotional side of the cancer journey. Your process really kind of helps people move along and complete the whole life cycle, whether it's early or late, or whether it's life survivorship, or as someone's, going into terminal illness and passes away. And that's one great thing about the cancer blueprint is everything that I've read over it so far is it really helps get people almost unstuck from certain areas and keep moving through the process.
Exactly. And it grows with the person. And just while we're on that, to anyone having a look at it, someone's come out and copied the cancer blueprint. So it's their website is the cancer blueprint. If you're looking at anything to do with it, please go to the one which has me on it, and it's through my website, which is cwcounselling.com.au, and there's a page on the cancer blueprint. Sorry to add that in, but I want to direct people to the right way, and someone came up and they've taken the name as well. So that's life, man.
That's the internet making it a little harder for you these days. I'll put a link to Chad's page and everything throughout the podcast, show notes, and on all the posts and stuff that I make as well too. So they'll get exactly right to you.
Thank you.
So Chad, I want to ask you a question, man. You've given some great advice so far to people as they're listening to the show about going through the diagnosis. Why don't you tell us some of the things? Maybe we all have certain circumstances where you get bombarded with advice whenever people are going through cancer journeys. Like people give you all sorts of crazy advice or things that they've tried or heard of or something along those lines. Give us maybe an idea of some of the things that you heard while you were trying to survive and make it through that now that you're looking back on it or sound a little crazy to you.
Crystal clear, man. And to this day, I still listen to it. I've got new challenges at the moment. Nothing compared to what I had before, but the mind wants to make them as complex as possible. So there's times that I go back to some of the things that I used to do. Like I'm one to document a lot. So I had about 2 years of data on myself about my different symptoms and what I was experiencing and the ways that I was able to adjust some of my lifestyle and some of the decisions that I was making on a daily basis to then get to a situation where I was on chemo and I got back to work 3 days a week for the Family Court of Australia. So I was able to influence my life a fair bit and I was able to learn from what I was going through. But what really helped me through some key points and some key moments, and it was all about repetition. I cut out I used to have on my doorway, it said, in life, there's no plan B. And I would tap that as I'd walk out of my door and I would think of that every day. And what that meant was that there's one place that I'm going and that is life and that is my future. And I didn't allow anything. By the end of it, I didn't allow anything to come into my mind. Because if I'm thinking about plan B, I'm not thinking about plan A. And there's only one plan. In life, there's no such thing as plan B. Then I have other influence as well. A lot of, I see myself as someone who's taken on, being able to benefit a lot from technology and being able to really feel that I've been coached by a lot of these key performers around the world. Some of them had cancer, some of them, or many of them didn't, but I was able to adjust some of their stories. I used to love searching survival stories, someone who's been lost in the mountains, someone who's been lost at sea, and someone who's overcome these different circumstances, because every little bit gave me hope and also added to this belief and fueled me. And at times that's all there was. There was belief that didn't have anything that looked like evidence to support it. Like there were many times where, as I said, from the get-go, I was a terminal patient. I had a life expectancy of under 2 years and each diagnosis got worse, but that didn't stop me. And that's what I want to stress to people, that what is impossible isn't. Like life can occur. Life can be amazingly mysterious and life can have these turnarounds, which can, present you in a range of different circumstances. And I'm very fortunate to be here cancer-free from what I've been able to go through and having a chat to you, man. And hopefully some people are listening to this and they've been able to benefit from it.
Absolutely. Tell everybody what your lowest moment was. We all have one where now that you look back on it, and maybe someone listening today is going through this low moment and they think that there's no hope and they don't want to keep fighting. They just want to give up. Tell us about your lowest moment and how you were able to get past that.
It's by far, there's a phase that occurred in my life. So after my first reoccurrence, so I kind of spoke about that a little bit before. The first time it came back about the size of an orange in a place which wasn't meant to be there. And then I had 2 cancers on my lung, and then another one on my right and another one on my other lung. So I had 3 on my lungs and the other one. And the way I've described this in the past is like the frontiers of this ongoing saga took its toll. So after fighting continuously, the parameters changed, and that resulted in, like, I went 2 months after my discharge. I got my results, which were all clear. And I did the call. I called my mum, as I usually do, and I was in the car feeling good, and I knew she would have been happy. But before I got to say to her, Mom, she said, Chad, I have to tell you something. And that's when my world changed, man. And she got diagnosed with a stage 3 bowel cancer 2 months after I got diagnosed. And at that time, it was 2 of us in the house on chemo. And I was like a 31-year-old guy. So I'm living at my home on the pension, just been through 2nd round of cancer on chemo. And then, so what occurs is that, there's a lot of projected anxiety, a lot of projected concern. And there's just this atmosphere of guilt and blame. So for me, and, I wonder if there's any parents listening, it's not your fault that your son or daughter has cancer. It's not your fault. And I think that's a key message that people need to hear. And that by far, man, was the hardest moment of my life.
So as you went through that moment, I know this is a really difficult moment to probably talk about. What brought you out of that dark place, of that anxiety and that depression? When did you start seeing yourself getting on the other end of that?
Oh, throughout it, like I got upset and I was sad, and that was okay. I didn't want to change the circumstances, but I couldn't. And this is where a lot of my learning, because I thought by then I already had an idea about like my recovery, my second recovery from. So when I talk about the second, it's when the first reoccurrence. So when that occurred, my body bounced back fast. Like I was back training. I was back down to pool. I'd already worked out the first time. I'd already got a lot of lessons about how I could heal my body, integrating sunlight, changing some of my diet, ensuring I'm getting rest, soaking up good vibes from friends, making sure I'm getting my training in. A lot of this, which is wiring my system. Like mental health, as I said before, it's not just how we're thinking, it's how we're feeling and what we're doing. So it's your physical, emotional, psychological, and social. And for some of you guys out there, particularly in America, we're going to be talking about your spiritual well-being as well. So there's key domains which result in your mental health. So I felt that I went well throughout it, but it was the hardest time of my life by far. And I cried nearly nonstop for like 2 weeks. I just couldn't stop crying. And I would be out the front of my mum's room at the hospital, and my 2 older brothers and my dad were out there, and they're talking about the football. And in some ways I had this moment that was like, wow, is this what we're about? Like, it's so normal. It's so normal now to be in a hospital, and it's so normal now that we've actually been desensitized to it. Because I was always the one in the bed. I was the one, and I felt, and from my early research and what I was looking at, there's a high correlation of people when, the stress that it takes on carers, etc., where it's not uncommon for this to occur. And I'm sure that there's many people who are resonating with this at the moment. So there was guilt and blame, man, for me, for what I'd put them through and the stress that I'd put them through. And that was hard, and that was painful. That was super painful. And one of the moments, one of the key, I've had many, many pivotal moments in my life. And one of them was a day, and my mum's got these tubes and they're hanging out of her she's been in bed, she's been operated on, she can't really talk, and she's not getting much food. And I remember I held her hand and I just said, I'm going to make you so happy one day. And yeah, and that was the fuel. So if I was, again, that's like something that I put up for myself. So if that was going to be like my first principle towards life, was getting my mom to be happy and to be healthy, that didn't allow me to be depressed, man. I had a mission, right? So I had to then be able to change and promote my life. And that for me involved love. That involved being like having a family. That involved being able to support people and use my story, use my pain, use my experiences, use my knowledge to be able to reduce suffering for others. And that meant me being able to hug mum so that she's there, I'm there. That meant a whole heap of things. It wasn't just the words. Like I said at the start, when the doctor told me that first time and I came up with that, I've got to be better, that then governed and dictated my everyday actions. So despite me not wanting to, or my mind telling me that things were difficult or that my fear wanted to come in, I'm in pursuit of that still. Like I don't have my family yet. So these are still things that I'm striving towards. I'm still not a position where I've been able to reach and support enough people and been able to go about my mission in a way where I think it's going to be worth it. And you can see it. I appreciate you talking and giving me this opportunity, man, because yeah, it gets a bit difficult for me at times. So yeah, I'm still underway. I'm still in progress. I've still got a lot of work to do, and it's about making my mum happy, man, and now making my fiance happy and making myself happy, and hopefully, working towards, there's people out here and making them happy as well.
Chad, you're a true overcomer, man. Just listen to your story. Listen to how you describe all these events and in such detail. You've got a real great gift for that, and you're just in the beginning of where you're going to be in this long process. But the way you've been able to document and all those experiences that you have, and now the authenticity and then the awareness and then everything that you're bringing to your method and with your story, man, that I'm telling you, that itself is going to make such a huge impact in everything. And I love the way you're able to talk about this, because, for all the males listening out there, like us men, we don't really talk about this stuff too much. And then again, we get stuck in that process, and we don't process all the emotions like other people do. We're stubborn by nature. We have to be the tough ones, all those things. But take some advice from Chad. Like, listen and see exactly what Chad's doing right now, and just start that kind of communication with your spouse or someone in your family, or either Chad or myself. We'd be glad to chat with you, and we'll give you more information on how to contact us at the end of the show. But just really take what Chad's doing right now and soak it up, and just listen and hang on every word that he's saying, because we're about to get into the whole diagram of the cancer blueprint, which Chad's going to talk to us about. But Chad, man, I want to tell you, I really appreciate you again, you sharing that part of your story. That's the tough part, but that's the real part. And that's the authenticity that comes with the 1% podcast. It's not there's no entertainment with that. It's just real life stories from real people going through it. And you've been able to share that just makes people feel like they're not alone, because everybody, no matter how you deal with your diagnosis, or people that are listening that have a relative that's going through that, maybe you're a parent and you have a child that's going through cancer and you're listening to this, everybody has a different way they process it. But know that as you listen to these episodes and as you meet people like Chad, you're not alone when it comes down to going through this process. And it takes a village to really get through life and all the circumstances and stuff. So I'm glad that you're listening with us today. And Chad, I want to ask you one more quick question before we get into your whole cancer blueprint and stuff. Yeah. So the show is called the 1% Podcast, and I'll remind everyone why I call it the 1% Podcast is because when I was at my lowest moment, just kind of like Chad mentioned earlier, something or someone would come into my life, some miraculous thing that would happen to me, or I would be reminded, or something would inspire me to keep pushing forward. And it always come in at my lowest moments. And for me, I kind of like to refer to them as winks from God. Like, hey, somebody else is in control. Like I'm not having to do this all by myself. Like there's different people that are being allowed to enter my life. And hopefully this podcast is what does that for you. But Chad, why don't you tell us, like, what is it, maybe a really specific moment or collection of moments, or did something happen like all along your journey that kind of made you think, hey, this is something that, is going to greatly affect more people than just myself. And it's meant to really help more people than just me. And when did you get out of that point where you were just all about you and maybe you opened up that calling or whatever that you had to really keep pushing forward?
Yeah. And I think this is something that I tell a lot of people at the moment. And I think at times that we need to leverage off someone else's belief for us to believe in it. And what I mean by that is that my fiance came into my life at a time when I just got diagnosed for the third time. I got told that my life, I was destined for palliative care and that there was no available treatments. And I ended up meeting this girl 3 days later, man. And I talk about her. I'm going to cry again.
All right, you get one cry, man. You don't get another cry on the show.
No, I've got to keep myself together, man. As I talk about her as a bit of an angel, like what you're talking about there. And one of the things that she had and that my mum has in me is belief. And the path that I'm on now is a result of their belief. And it was from their belief that I started to believe in what I can do and what I should be doing. And so what I say to a lot of people that I'm working with now is that, and I see it in some people, and again, I'm talking to someone else and I hope he's listening, is that he knows he knows that I'm talking about him at the moment, and he knows that I have belief in him, and I know that he's going to come around and start believing in himself soon, and he knows that I believe in him, and that's enough. So yeah.
Awesome, man. All right, Chad, why don't you tell us a little bit about your life after now? So now that you made it all the way through all these reoccurrences and you started putting all this work and all these things that you had documented together and you came up with the cancer blueprint, why don't you break it down into steps for us real quick and give us just a highlight of that, and then we'll go into more detail and I'll get people to go to your website and really find out more information.
Yeah, of course, man. Of course. And so this got started in 2014. So I've been promoting and working with testing, retesting, evaluating the cancer blueprint for over 4 years now. And it first happened, I called the equivalent of the American Cancer Society in Australia to ask what sort of support was available. Cut a long story short, they said, because I was on long-term treatment, there was nothing available. I hung up the phone. I started writing this program. It was about a 10,000 word thesis back then. And I took it to a university to get validated, because I believed that there was too much confusion and there was already a lot of people saying these different things. And I really wanted to be able to measure and validate what I was promoting. So I went from there and I got it. I then tested it with a charity in Australia. And then I took it into 50 people's homes. And I've got some fairly good results, man. There's a number of different areas that I'm really interested in. And it's about quality of life. It's about their level of support. It's about their optimism. It's about their worry about the future. It's about how they cope. And it's about the overall impact of cancer. And those 6 areas for me are crucial. And they're what I try to target and the areas that I try to help promote. And I do that through a method and a model. So everyone that I work with follows a model that I work through. And I think that people with cancer need to go through these 4 different phases and 4 different stages. And I'll go into them in a little bit of detail now. And why I think that's important, and it's applicable. I've worked with different genders, different ages, but it's all personalized. So there's a theory that I think, and there's a methodology that I have that supports people to go towards a position where they're able to make sense and get to a position where there is this opportunity, or there's a care plan, and the care plan is their blueprint. So I support people to develop their own blueprint. So it's not what Chad has and not what Chad does. It's about what's best for that person. And we start through these ideas where we start looking at some of the social domain. We go through some identity. We start looking at some necessities. And the idea with that is have a look at personalized nutrition, movement, and meditation plans. And then we get to some preparation and future work. I'm sorry, I'd love to go into a little bit more detail, but that's a little bit of a framework of how it works. People work through these exercises with me, and I support and coach and empower them to be able to develop these sustainable ways of moving. And to give you an example of what it looks like, I collect a little bit of data on some of the cases as well. And obviously I'm not going to use any names or circumstances at the moment, but I'm sure he's going to be happy to hear this. But when he started working with me, we had a look at his hours of sleep. He was sleeping 12 hours on a Sunday night. Then it would maybe be 3, 4 hours, 7 hours, 6 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. So very scattered and erratic. And by the end of the 5 weeks, he was getting 8, 7, 6, 7, 6, 7. So I'm not saying that it was perfect, but we'd been able to really change the way he was sleeping. Now, why I look at sleep is because what do we need to do as people with cancer? We need to heal. And if we're not sleeping, we're not able to heal. Also, what he was looking at, if we have a look how many steps he was doing, this is just another measurement. If we have a look, his measurement of 10,000 steps, there was none that he was doing. At the end of the program, he was doing 3 times a week, hitting 10,000. So we've got some data there to say, hey, this is having a bit of an impact. I don't have it in front of me, but I really like his belief and how he was seeing cancer. And that's on my Instagram page. Someone can have a look at it. But I think he talks about in week 1 when he's describing his circumstances that, he's vulnerable, whatever's going to happen, the pain, the cancer's just going to come back anyway. So what's the point? That's a summary of what it is. And then by week 4, he's made a fairly significant shift. But he's not saying, cancer's not going to come back. He's saying that I feel I'm in the best possible situation to be able to live a life, even if at times that involves some pain and fear. And I guess that's really important for me because it shows progression and shows that he's getting an understanding and awareness about what he's going through. Also, if we have a look for him, pain is another interesting scale for me, which I like looking at. So we had a look at his pain scale. He'd be getting about a 6 or a 7 or an 8 on a weekly basis, at least once a week. And by the end of the 5 weeks, he wasn't hitting anything over a 3. His nutrition had changed. His relationships had got better. He started hitting his targets at work. He was a massive success. And I hope he's listening out there because I'm very proud of the work that he's been able to do.
I love that, man. It sounds like you're making a huge impact in a lot of people's lives. Why don't you give everyone the website specifically for them to follow to really be able to check out the cancer blueprint?
Yeah, so it's www.cwcounseling.com.au. But you can just type the cancer blueprint into Google and I come up first. So, yeah. So if you type just the cancer blueprint into Google, the Google search will take you to my page.
All right. And Chad's available on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Chad, why don't you give everyone your email address as well if they want to reach out to you and have a couple of questions?
Of course. So that would be Chad, CHAD, at CW Counseling. So CWCUNSELLING.com.au. You can just jump on my page and leave a comment and that will go through to me. I've got some blogs and some things that I give out for free. So everyone just jump on there and have a look.
Love it, man. Well, Chad, I like to end the show asking people, all of our guests, 5 quick personal questions about yourself so they can, they've already heard you, really go into your cancer story, but really want to get to know you a little bit. Why don't you tell everyone 2 things that motivate you each day to keep pushing forward?
Yeah. So there's going to be 3 things, but it's going to be my fiance, my mom, and my future self.
And why don't you recommend maybe some products or supplements or either websites? I know you got your site out there. Are there other resources out there that you think are available for people to check out?
Yeah, so I'm a big one for some of the work that Charlotte's Web are doing. So that's a CBD oil up in Colorado. So recommend people getting that. And another thing that I would suggest people get is a yoga mat. And go and get a yoga mat, get a good yoga mat, and learn from yoga and learn from this creating some difficulty in your life and what you're able to create in your mat and how you're able to then bring that into the outside world.
What's the last book you've read?
I'm reading The Alchemist in Spanish. So I'm learning Spanish at the moment. And I've got the alchemist in Spanish. So I'm working my way through that, and while I'm learning a new language. Yeah.
All right. Now, what's your favorite food or recipe? And it can't be anything American. I know you've been over here for a couple of weeks, but give us something good.
I think the thing that really, really sets me off is just an amazing bowl of greens with these delicious fermented veggies and maybe a bit of tahini and avocado, some chili, where, good food, good fresh food done well. So it's, I don't want to say just a salad because it won't do it justice, but, like a really good mix of your macronutrients. So there's got to be good fats in there. There's got to be good protein. There's got to be good carbs, and it's fresh food. That sets me off. Maybe a good coffee to go down with that as well.
All right. So what are 3 items that you have left on your life or bucket list that you want to accomplish going forward?
Yeah. So I want to be an amazing husband, want to be a great dad, and I want to be able to, change people's lives through the Cancer Blueprint.
Well, Chad, man, you're killing it out there right now. I know you're in the beginning stages of a lot of stuff, but the work you've done so far is absolutely amazing. You're automatically impacting so many people's lives already, and I love the way that you take all of your knowledge and all of your past experiences and combine those together to really help people. And I'm so excited to be able to share the Cancer Blueprint and talk with you today. I think that you'll have a great opportunity to really help a lot of people in the future, man. So, Chad, thank you for being a guest on the show, and we'll be in touch with you really soon, okay?
Thank you very much. And just to say as well for you, what you're doing and spreading this message and being a vehicle for some of these other people who I've seen come before me and the people who are going to come after me, like you are on a very good mission yourself. And this is just contributing to this knowledge base. And, I encourage people to soak all this up. So on behalf of everyone, man, thank you very much.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.
Cheers, man.
We appreciate you spending time with us on today's episode and encourage you to continue the conversation to help you keep pushing forward. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as ways to recommend a guest and connect to Truett personally, head over to 1%podcast.com. Be sure to join us next time for more stories of inspiration right here with Truett Taylor on the 1% Podcast.